What is going on, the overemployed army? In this video, we're going to review this NBC video that just came out called "Is the Golden Age of Remote Work Over?" They're just going to have a bunch of experts and other people like Elon Musk talking about the end of remote work. I'm going to throw it on 1.5 speed because it can get a little long, so let's get right into it.
This is how corporate America feels about remote work in 2023.
The laptop class is living in la la land. It's messed up to assume that yes, they have to go to work, but you don't. It's not just a productivity thing. I think it's morally wrong.
Listen, it doesn't work for young kids. It doesn't work for...
So just real quick there, obviously Elon is the type of person that has the type of companies that really benefit from in-person work because they deal with extreme innovation and extremely fast-paced, right? So Elon loves working with speed. But I think he's trying to apply his mindset and his business mindset to Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, where the reality is if you have been a remote worker for one of those companies, it's very slow. So even if you're in the office, you can't really produce that much work anyways. It's a slow environment. So he's trying to apply his mindset to everybody, and it's just not the reality.
For spontaneity, it doesn't really work for management.
And this is how the corporate world felt about remote work in 2020 during the height of COVID-19.
The biggest advantages, I think, are access to large pools of talent who don't live around the big cities and aren't willing to move there.
Since we've all been forced into being remote now for 9 months, I think we've realized that if you have somebody in a particular location who's willing to work the hours to be able to collaborate, you can do it very effectively. So it's changed how we thought about hiring.
Let's pause here. Notice something? In fewer than 3 years, corporate leaders have reversed their approach to remote work, and it seems like this tactic has been working. The latest data from the Census Bureau found that fewer than 26% of U.S. households still have someone working from home. That's down from 37% in early 2021.
So the reason we're having this entire conversation about remote work dying is, first of all, because we kept thinking that we were going to bounce back to quote unquote normal. When the pandemic started and we had people working from home, the idea was this is very temporary and we were all going to come back.
So really what's changed the discussion about remote work is the slowdown in the labor market. There are a lot of employers out there who had suspicions.
The reason a lot of people are wrong by saying it was temporary is the skilled workers are in a position at this point where they can demand and negotiate for fully remote work, right? So the companies that want to hold on to those really skilled workers have to compete with companies that do offer fully remote work. And that's kind of the biggest portion of remote workers that are still being held on. That's kind of really what's pushing and keeping remote work alive. The fact that a lot of workers are able to have that leverage, right? They can go to another company, quit their job if they're forced to come to the office. And that's what's creating a lot of problems for some companies that do want to enforce return to office, right? That blocks them.
About remote work from the start. And you can see that kind of by the timing of when people actually went to being remote during the start of the pandemic. So the concerns that employers had about remote work were present all during the Great Reshuffle, but they didn't really have much of a choice. But with the emergency orders expiring for the pandemic this year, now they can actually start to bring people back and address some of those concerns that they might have about productivity.
Remote work was thrust upon us basically by the pandemic. Before the pandemic, remote work was pretty rare, so about 5% of days. We were forced to work from home. All managers and professionals were basically fully remote for much of 2020. And then it turned out it worked really well.
Such as no commute, working in your sweatpants, doing your laundry between Zoom calls, but also just the savings in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of your commute, in terms of being able to spend more time with your children or pick them up from school.
People quickly found ways to be productive, to continue communications together, and to keep collaborating together.
The productivity conversation about remote work, in my opinion, is extremely pointless. I think everybody knows that productivity can be extremely tightly managed by managers and teams overall, right? So if a company needs to deliver a product at this deadline, it doesn't matter if they're at home or if they're in the office. If someone misses a deadline, it is obvious, right? Productivity is irrelevant at that point. You will know if someone is missing a deadline. Whether they're in the office or not, if they're remote, it doesn't matter. If they need to make a deadline, you have to enforce that deadline, right? It doesn't matter if they're in the office or not.
And whatever tools they could invest in to support that work and that teamwork.
As the world slowly started to open up, corporate America began to change its tune on remote work, so much so that some firms now even threaten to fire their employees if they don't show up at work.
Zoom, the company this is, now throwing in the towel on fully remote work.
Even Zoom, the video conferencing company that helped make the remote work boom happen in the first place, is also taking a hard line on return to office.
It's an abrupt shift from last year when it suggested a majority of its employees would work a hybrid schedule with just 2% working in person full-time.
So some of the pushback remote work is driven by concerns about productivity. There have been some experimental studies that show that there's some productivity impacts potentially from remote work. But those studies are also experiments, right? It's unclear how they apply to the broader labor force.
The United States does have a productivity problem. Before the second quarter of this year, the country had experienced 5 consecutive quarters of year-over-year declines in worker productivity. In fact, a major study that Professor Nicholas Bloom co-authored.
These studies that come out about productivity are honestly some of the biggest bullshit studies I've heard in my life. People don't realize how much productivity has increased overall. Sure, maybe even if it is on a downtrend. I think these people need to ask themselves, why should workers want to be productive? Inflation is 30% per year. How do you expect people to continue wanting to be extremely productive when there's no reason to? Your money just declines and declines. You don't gain anything. And that's not even considering the lack of promotions and the lack of salary increases, right? Even if you perform extremely well, you're going to progress in your career. Sure, you'll be a better engineer or financial analyst, whatever you do in your field, but you're not going to benefit much from it. You're going to get an extra 10, 15% every year and a half. Wow, an extra 10, 20 grand. These people aren't really incentivized to work harder. Why would productivity be booming if inflation is 20, 30%? You have to incentivize workers, right? It's not that simple, like you have to be extremely productive and more productive every year. You have to give workers a reason to be more productive. It's so stupid the way they're talking, they're not really thinking of the people as people, right? They're thinking of them as numbers and as objects or robots that should be getting better and better every year without considering the facts that all these people have desires and needs too. And if they're not being met, obviously they're not going to continue being more productive.
Authored found that fully remote work led to productivity declines of about 10 to 20% when compared to fully in-person work.
Now, the other important thing in the study is we pointed out, look, what firms care about ultimately is profitability. And it turns out that if you have an employee that's remote, you also save a lot of costs. So you're saving about 10% less overhead because you don't have an office. And then you can hire these folks, maybe nationally or internationally, maybe save another 20, 30, 40%. Remote workers, they may be 5, 10% less productive, but they are so much cheaper that it's profitable for firms to have many teams, many employees remote.
And this especially applies to, like I was mentioning before, the companies that are so slow and barely put out new features or products that just kind of do maintenance work. A lot of these employees are just meatbags. They're just sitting in chairs. Like if you've ever worked in some offices, you'll see some employees literally falling asleep close to, scrolling Reddit, playing games on their phone, on their computer, scrolling Twitter. Like they don't need to be there. I understand for companies that are on the edge of innovation, like Elon's companies. I understand why that needs to be in person, but a lot of companies don't need that. Remote work is fine for them.
You're coming with the stat to protect yourself, to put the positive narrative for people to return to work. I'd like to think, what were the productivity like when people were all working from home, when you're not allowed to have any face-to-face worker at all, right? So now you're spinning it in your favor. So I'd like to challenge that.
If the employee can perform their duties and handle their responsibilities, they should be encouraged to work from wherever makes them feel as excited about life as possible. I camped in Key West for 3 weeks. I was in North Dakota in February. I've been up and down the coast of California. I've been to our national parks. For me, that's where I feel best working, and that's where I've gotten my best work done. I believe we can work from anywhere.
All right, I'll just mute that out. And yeah, completely true, right? So if a worker is not meeting the standards that they should be meeting, right, for productivity, they can fire them. You can fire that. You can tell them you're not performing good enough to be fully remote. You have to perform better, or we will either make you go to the office or fire you, right? That is always an option that employers can use, right? So I don't understand this idea of they're not as productive as they should be. Well, you decide that as the manager of the company, right? What the standards are. And if they don't pass that bar, you can then enforce some different type of standard. But just putting a blanket out there like, oh, it's not productive enough is completely the wrong way to approach it.
Work for JP Morgan and Chase. It was all remote, but once they changed their policy to come to office, I was in Plano, Texas, but I live in California, so I decided not to move out there because of my kids. I have 2 school-going kids. I have to manage work-life balance as well. That was the reason why I quit my job. JP Morgan had given me 45 days of time frame to find another job, and I applied for some other companies and found a remote job with Leidos. So I've been working remotely with Leidos as a senior system analyst.
And that's really where the power of being overemployed or just being a remote worker overall comes in. JP Morgan wanted to basically fire this guy if he didn't come to the office. So he's like, okay, I'm fine with that. I'll find another job. And he did, a fully remote position. So if JP Morgan really valued his skills, which obviously they didn't, they would have kept him, they would have kept him remote. But they didn't care about him that much. To them, he was just another worker. So they were okay with letting him go.
Parajali is not alone in his choice to quit rather than return to an office setting. Finding a fully remote job, though, is getting more challenging. New research from Indeed found that job postings are declining faster in metropolitan areas where many jobs can be done remotely. A similar trend is playing out on LinkedIn as well.
So on LinkedIn last year, we saw that about 1 in 7 jobs were remote, and now that's down to about 1 in 11. But over this time, we've also seen an inversion. And now we see about 1 in 7 jobs being hybrid, coming up from 1 in 11 last year.
This might be true, but also something you have to really keep in mind is a lot of these hybrid positions, you can negotiate fully remote, right? So it is definitely harder to find as many remote positions as like 2020, 2021. But a lot of these you can negotiate for fully remote if you actually get to the offer stage. So don't be dissuaded by these numbers.
So we're seeing more folks coming back into the office, but they are not coming back into the office 5 days a week.
Many employers are strong arming their team members and that they would love remote work to die faster. As a result, I do see that remote work is quote unquote slowly dying and becoming more competitive to get.
The pandemic-induced shift to remote work has raised concerns about the future of commercial real estate, especially office spaces. The latest report from McKinsey Global Institute suggests that remote work threatens to erase $800 billion from the value of office real estate in.
And this is one huge reason why a lot of elite people have special interests to get rid of remote work, right? Look how much money they're passing up on without offices being needed, right? They don't need offices. They're going to lose so much money.
In 9 major cities around the world. Other experts say the empty offices created by remote work in various cities are also leading to what's been called the, quote, urban doom loop.
The problem does start with the office demand, right? And we've seen with the advent of remote work and hybrid work a dramatic reduction in office demand over these past 3 years that has led to rising vacancy rates and, in fact, all-time high vacancy rates in the office market right now. And that does put downward pressure on the valuations of these offices. You mentioned.
Who cares? Who cares about the value? Whoever owns this commercial real estate will lose, but that's the world. That's how money works, right? That's how economies work. Markets change. If demand goes down, they're going to lose money. That's not something we should enforce workers to go to offices for just because people are losing real estate money. Their mortgages aren't being paid. Who cares about those people? Is the productivity actually affected? Are the people enjoying their lives more? That's what's important, not whether people are making extra cash flow on their commercial real estate.
You mentioned that they're down, probably 20, 30% already. They're likely to fall by more. And that causes downward pressure on property tax revenues. Because for a lot of cities, office tax revenues is a big chunk of their tax revenues.
Yeah, and then it's a tax issue, as if people aren't taxed enough. Every time you get a paycheck, you get income tax. Every time you buy something, you pay sales tax. Every time a year passes, you lose 15, 20% of your dollar in inflation. And now they're saying that you should be paying more tax, of course.
As often as much as 50%. Some of that is coming from office, maybe 20%. So maybe 10% of overall tax revenues for cities comes from office. If those offices lose about half of their value, tax revenues fall, and that
maybe if the government didn't spend hundreds of billions of dollars on random things in other countries, they wouldn't have this issue.
It's a huge hole in the budget.
So like everything, there are going to be winners and losers as we transition to a world where we have remote work as a permanent feature. One of the potential losers is commercial real estate, in part because offices aren't needed as much, or they're not needed at all. So commercial real estate may be a loser for remote work. We may also be concerned about businesses that support workers who come into the office. So think about your food trucks, your laundry services, all of these businesses that are centered around folks coming into the office 5 days a week. They may face difficulties when that's not happening as much.
Commercial real estate is problematic in a number of big cities, but there are a lot of people now who are saying that we need to bring people back to the office because our commercial buildings are empty, which is a little bit like saying we need to have people use the horse and buggy because cars are going to wipe out that industry.
Exactly. Thank you, Joanne. I couldn't have said it better. Exactly. Joanne said that perfectly. Completely perfect.
We have to understand that the world has changed, our ways of working have changed, and we can't go back to an old, outdated way simply because we are being motivated by commercial real estate. Commercial real estate needs to rethink. We've already seen in some cities that it's being converted, it's being used for other purposes, some of it's being converted into residential housing, and we're going to have to get much more creative about what to do with those empty buildings.
Those people that own those buildings, that commercial real, most of them are billionaires. Like, who really cares about them? They're fine. They'll be fine.
If you're pushing your employees to come back to the office, you got to make sure that they're coming back to the office for something other than needs.
I don't think we ever will bounce back to those pre-pandemic days. What I do think we will see, and we are already seeing, is that there is a benefit to also being in person. And that's why we're seeing companies first saying come back 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week even. But I do think that the old school 5 days a week, 40 hours on the premises, I do think that's dead. I don't think it's coming back.
I'm a family person, and most importantly, I can save multiple hours by working for myself.
If you're concerned about it, the best thing to do is figure out how to make it work, because it's definitely not going away.
All right, so I do agree with that last point, right? I don't think anything should be applied as a blanket statement, right? So for some companies, obviously it'll make more sense for in-person components to exist. Some companies won't at all, right? Some will work with hybrid. But I don't think just for the sake of control and power over employees that they should be forced to go into the office. And that's the reality of what a lot of people are saying. They just want more control over their employees, and they don't want them to be able to enjoy their lives from home. It's not like these people that work from home have super amazing lives. Or again, inflation is still killing everyone, right? So a lot of these people are just so stuck in terms of their high position of power that they're just so used to exerting it on all their employees. And now it feels like a foreign concept to them to give freedom and choice to their employees, right? They're not used to it. So it kind of makes them pissed, and they want to get back that control. If you guys like this video, leave a like, comment down below what you think about what people said in this video and what you think is going to happen in the future, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.